Everybody pays. That was the first thing people whispered when they rolled into Ashcroft, a quiet highway town tucked between endless stretches of pine trees and fading farmland where strangers rarely stayed long enough to ask questions. Nobody could say exactly when the rumor had started, only that it had become as ordinary as the gas station coffee or the American flag waving outside City Hall. If you drove through often enough, you learned to keep a couple $100s in your wallet, not because the law required it, but because someone wearing a badge usually did. Most travelers handed over the cash without a word, eager to get back on Interstate 27 and leave the town in their rearview mirror. Some called it a local tradition. Others called it the price of avoiding trouble. Either way, everyone paid. Everyone except one man. Just after sunrise on a crisp October morning, an aging black Ford F-150 rolled toward the checkpoint at exactly 35 miles per hour, the posted speed limit. The truck wasn't polished. It carried a few scratches along the passenger door and enough road dust to suggest thousands of miles behind it. There was nothing flashy about the driver either. Marcus Brooks wore a faded baseball cap, a plain gray work jacket, blue jeans, and worn leather boots that looked older than the truck itself. He didn't glance left or right. His hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, and his eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead as though this stop had been expected long before he ever crossed the county line. Officer Ryan Cole stepped into the lane with an easy smile that fooled almost everyone who met him for the first time. His uniform looked immaculate. His badge reflected the morning sunlight. To anyone passing through, he appeared to be exactly what a small-town police officer should look like. Beside him stood Officer Derek Mason, leaning casually against a patrol SUV while sipping coffee, as if the morning had already become routine. Ryan motioned for the truck to stop and approached the driver's window with practiced confidence. "Morning, sir," he said pleasantly. "Welcome to Ashcroft." Marcus lowered the window without saying a word. Ryan's smile widened just enough to seem friendly. "Before you head into town, there's a local protection fee. $200. Cash works best." The words floated through the cool morning air as casually as someone asking for directions. Marcus looked at the officer for several quiet seconds. No surprise crossed his face. No anger. No confusion. Only a calm expression that somehow made the silence feel heavier than the request itself. Finally, he asked one simple question. "Protection from what?" Ryan chuckled, glancing back at Derek, who answered with a grin of his own. Around them, a pickup towing a fishing boat slowed almost instinctively. A delivery van stopped farther back. Nobody honked. Nobody complained. They simply waited, watching with the uneasy patience of people who had seen this scene unfold too many times before. Ryan rested one hand lightly against the open window. "Around here," he said, "it's easier not to ask questions." Marcus's eyes never left the officer's face. He nodded once, almost thoughtfully, before looking past the checkpoint toward the empty road disappearing into town. There was no fear in his expression, no challenge either, just quiet observation, as though he were memorizing every detail that everyone else had stopped noticing years ago. And somewhere beyond the growing line of waiting vehicles, where the morning sky stretched wide above the highway, the next 4 minutes had already begun. Ryan Cole had delivered the sentence with the confidence of someone who had never expected to hear a different answer. Around him, engines idled quietly as drivers watched through windshields without making eye contact. A woman inside the delivery van slowly lowered her coffee cup. An older couple towing a camper exchanged nervous glances. Nobody spoke because everyone already knew how stories like this usually ended. The visitor reached for his wallet. The cash disappeared. The road reopened. Life moved on. Marcus Brooks did not reach for his wallet. Instead, he rested one hand on the edge of the open window and looked at the small nameplate sewn above Ryan's uniform pocket. "Officer Cole," he said calmly, pronouncing the name with surprising precision. "That is a nice town you have here." Ryan smiled again, although this one did not quite reach his eyes. "It stays nice because people cooperate." Marcus nodded once. "That still does not answer my question." Derek Mason stepped away from the patrol vehicle, folding his paper coffee cup before dropping it into a nearby trash can. "Sir," he said, keeping his voice measured, "you are holding up traffic." Marcus glanced into his side mirror. The line of vehicles had grown longer. A landscaping trailer waited behind the fishing boat. A school bus had stopped nearly 200 feet back. Every driver remained inside, watching. Nobody sounded a horn. The silence felt almost rehearsed. Ryan leaned slightly closer. You can settle this in less than 10 seconds. $200, and you will be on your way. Marcus smiled politely for the first time. It was not a smile of agreement. It was the expression of someone quietly observing a conversation that had become unexpectedly interesting. I have traveled through a lot of counties, he said. I have paid tolls. I have paid bridge fees. I have never heard of a protection fee collected on the side of a public highway. Derek crossed his arms. Then today is your lucky day? You learned something new. A few uneasy laughs drifted from people standing outside a nearby convenience store. They disappeared almost as quickly as they came. Marcus noticed them. He also noticed the elderly man near the gas pumps who immediately looked toward the ground instead of meeting anyone's eyes. Fear had a way of teaching entire communities to stay quiet. Ryan pulled a small notepad from his pocket. Driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Marcus handed over each document without hesitation. Ryan studied them carefully. Colorado. Marcus nodded. Passing through. Business or vacation? Neither. Ryan waited for more. Nothing came. Derek circled slowly around the truck, casually examining the tires, the trailer hitch, and the dusty bed that held nothing except a weathered duffel bag and a folded canvas tarp. There was nothing unusual to see, yet he continued looking as though expecting something to justify extending the stop. Marcus remained perfectly still. He did not rush anyone. He did not argue. He simply watched the town waking up around him. A church bell echoed faintly across the cool morning air. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a freight train sounded its horn. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. An ordinary town that had slowly forgotten the difference between authority and trust. Ryan closed the folder containing the documents, but did not hand them back. You know, he said, cooperation makes mornings easier for everybody. Marcus looked at the officer with the same steady expression he had worn since arriving. Sometimes, he replied softly, the hardest part of any morning is believing nobody is paying attention. Neither officer understood what he meant. But somewhere beyond the highway, events that had already been set in motion continued moving closer with every passing second. The morning air remained strangely calm, yet every passing second seemed to stretch longer than the one before it. Ryan Cole slipped Marcus Brooks's driver's license back into the folder instead of returning it, almost as if possession alone gave him control over the conversation. Marcus noticed the gesture, but said nothing. He simply rested both hands where they could be seen and waited with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than arguments ever could. Derek Mason slowly walked another circle around the truck, paying particular attention to details that seemed too ordinary to matter. He paused beside the weathered duffel bag resting in the truck bed before looking toward Ryan with a subtle shrug. There was nothing suspicious to report, nothing unusual to justify delaying the stop. Yet neither officer appeared interested in ending it. Behind them, the line of waiting vehicles continued growing. A family traveling with bicycles mounted to the back of their sport utility vehicle watched through the windshield. A retired truck driver standing outside the convenience store folded his newspaper beneath one arm, but never took his eyes off the checkpoint. Even the clerk inside the gas station glanced toward the road every few moments before pretending to reorganize a shelf near the front window. It was clear this was no surprise to anyone who lived there. Marcus quietly observed each face. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked resigned. None appeared shocked. That realization seemed to interest him more than the officers themselves. Ryan finally spoke again. Step out of the truck for a moment, please. His tone remained polite, almost rehearsed. Marcus opened the driver's door without hesitation and stepped onto the pavement. He adjusted his jacket against the cool October breeze before closing the door gently behind him. There was no frustration in his expression, only steady composure that somehow made everyone else appear increasingly restless. Ryan gestured toward the front of the truck. We just need to clear up a few things. Marcus nodded. Take all the time you need. The answer seemed to catch Ryan off guard. He had expected resistance, excuses, perhaps even raised voices. Instead, the man standing before him behaved like someone with nowhere else to be. Derek examined the license plate once more before quietly asking, You travel alone? Today, yes, Marcus answered. Nobody meeting you in town? Marcus smiled faintly. Plans have a way of changing. Derek frowned, uncertain whether the remark carried any hidden meaning. Ryan opened the driver's side door and looked inside the cab. A folded road map rested beside a stainless steel travel mug. A flashlight sat neatly beneath the seat. The dashboard was remarkably clean. There were no expensive electronics, no luggage piled inside, nothing suggesting wealth or importance. Everything about the truck seemed intentionally ordinary. Ryan stepped back out and closed the door. You keep your vehicle organized. Marcus looked toward the truck with quiet appreciation. Organization saves time. Those words lingered in the air longer than expected. Somewhere behind the waiting traffic, a child asked his father why everyone had stopped. The father lowered his voice before answering, but Marcus noticed the conversation anyway. He also noticed several people checking the time on their phones. It had been only minutes since the stop began, yet the atmosphere felt noticeably different now. Less curious, more expectant. Marcus slowly raised his wrist and glanced at his watch for the first time that morning. The movement was small enough that neither officer thought much of it. Ryan tucked the folder beneath one arm and offered another practiced smile. Looks like this might take a little longer than you hoped. Marcus met his eyes with complete calm. Actually, he replied, it is unfolding almost exactly on schedule. For reasons neither officer could explain, those words settled over the checkpoint with a weight that made even the quiet highway seem to hold its breath. The words lingered in the cool morning air long after Marcus Brooks had spoken them. Ryan Cole forced a small laugh, but it sounded less convincing than before. On schedule, he repeated. You make it sound like this stop was on your calendar. Marcus answered with the same calm expression that had unsettled both officers from the beginning. Life usually rewards people who prepare. Ryan looked toward Derek Mason, expecting another sarcastic remark, but Derek had become distracted by something else. His attention rested on the truck once again, specifically the worn duffel bag lying neatly against the front wall of the truck bed. It was ordinary in every possible way, faded by years of travel and marked with the kind of scratches that came from hard use instead of careful storage. Yet something about it refused to fit the picture Ryan had built in his mind. Marcus did not carry himself like someone intimidated by uniforms. He did not speak like someone trying to impress anyone either. He simply appeared completely comfortable standing in the middle of a situation that made everyone else increasingly uncomfortable. Ryan cleared his throat and opened the folder once more. Mr. Brooks, until we finish verifying everything, your documents will remain with us. Marcus nodded politely. Of course. There was no complaint, no negotiation, just acceptance that somehow made Ryan feel less certain than before. A light breeze drifted across the highway, carrying the scent of pine trees mixed with fresh gasoline from the nearby pumps. Somewhere behind the waiting traffic, a dog barked once before falling silent again. The entire checkpoint seemed suspended in a strange pause, as though the town itself had begun waiting for something it could not yet see. Marcus slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Derek instinctively raised one hand. Easy there. Marcus immediately stopped. Telephone, he said evenly. Ryan hesitated for a moment before giving a cautious nod. Slowly, Marcus removed a simple black cellular telephone. It looked several years old, with no flashy case and no expensive accessories attached to it. He unlocked the screen, selected a single contact without scrolling, and placed the call. Neither officer attempted to stop him. They simply listened. The call connected almost immediately. Marcus spoke only one sentence. My arrival has been delayed at the scheduled location. He paused for less than 2 seconds, listening quietly before replying, understood. Then he ended the call and slipped the telephone back into his pocket. Ryan frowned. That is it. Marcus nodded. That is all that was necessary. Derek folded his arms. You are not going to tell us who you called? Marcus offered a faint smile. Someone who appreciates punctuality. The answer provided no names, no titles, and no explanations. Yet it carried a quiet certainty that neither officer could dismiss. Ryan glanced toward the growing line of waiting vehicles. Several drivers had stepped outside now, pretending to stretch their legs while watching from a respectful distance. Even the elderly man from the gas station remained standing beside the newspaper rack without turning a single page. People sensed that the morning had shifted. They simply did not know why. Marcus looked briefly toward the eastern horizon where the first full rays of sunlight reflected against the highway. Then his eyes returned to Ryan with the same composed confidence. "Officer Cole," he said softly, "have you ever noticed how quickly ordinary mornings become unforgettable ones?" Ryan attempted another confident smile, but this time it came a little slower. Somewhere beyond the rolling hills outside Ashcroft, unseen, engines continued closing the distance, and although no one at the checkpoint could hear them yet, the quiet countdown Marcus had been following since sunrise had entered its final minutes. Ryan Cole slipped the folder beneath his arm once again and glanced toward the line of waiting vehicles with growing irritation. What had begun as another ordinary stop had quietly become something else entirely. More people were watching now. The family with the bicycles remained inside their sport utility vehicle, but every window had been lowered. The retired truck driver still stood beside the convenience store, pretending to read the same newspaper that had not moved in several minutes. Even the cashier had stepped outside, wiping an already clean countertop near the fuel pumps simply to keep the checkpoint within view. Nobody wanted to interfere. Everyone wanted to know how this story would end. Derek Mason broke the silence first. "You know, Ryan, maybe we should take another look through the truck." Ryan nodded without taking his eyes off Marcus Brooks. "Good idea." Marcus answered before either officer moved. "You are welcome to look at anything that is visible." Ryan studied him carefully. "You are remarkably calm." Marcus smiled politely. Panic rarely improves decision-making. That answer earned no reply. Derek walked back toward the truck, circling it once more with slow, deliberate steps. The faded duffel bag remained untouched. The folded canvas tarp had not shifted an inch. A small toolbox rested neatly against the cab. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing suggested hidden compartments or expensive equipment. Everything reflected the habits of someone who valued order over appearance. Derek looked underneath the truck, checked the trailer hitch again, then stepped back with the same result as before. Nothing. Ryan folded his arms. "You travel light." Marcus nodded. "Only what I need." That is unusual for someone crossing several states. It depends on what the destination requires. Ryan waited for him to elaborate, but Marcus simply fell silent again. The quiet had become its own form of confidence. It forced everyone else to keep talking while he carefully measured every word. A county maintenance pickup approached the growing traffic line before stopping behind the school bus. The driver recognized the checkpoint immediately, sighed, and turned off the engine. He looked toward Marcus for only a second before lowering his eyes. It was another small detail Marcus noticed without appearing to notice it at all. Ryan shifted his weight and checked his watch. Barely a few minutes had passed, yet it felt considerably longer. "You said this morning was unfolding on schedule," he said. "Still believe that?" Marcus glanced briefly toward the eastern stretch of highway before answering. "More than ever." Derek laughed softly. "You keep talking like somebody important is coming." Marcus looked at him with complete sincerity. Everyone is important to someone. The answer sounded simple enough, yet it somehow left Derek without another joke. A cool breeze swept across the asphalt, rustling the flags outside the gas station and carrying the distant sound of engines from somewhere beyond the hills. The noise was too faint for anyone else to notice over the idling traffic, but Marcus lifted his eyes for just a moment, as though recognizing a familiar rhythm carried by the wind. Ryan noticed the brief movement. "Expecting company?" Marcus returned his attention to the officers. "I am expecting accountability." Those words settled over the checkpoint with quiet certainty. No threats, no raised voice, no anger. Just a statement delivered by someone who seemed absolutely certain that the next chapter of the morning no longer belonged to the people standing beside the patrol vehicles. And although no one present could yet explain why, the uneasy confidence that had belonged to Ryan and Derek since sunrise had begun to shift, almost imperceptibly, toward the quiet traveler who had never once needed to raise his voice. For the first time that morning, Marcus Brooks did not look at either officer. His attention drifted toward the distant stretch of highway where the rising sun painted long bands of gold across the asphalt. Ryan Cole followed his gaze, but saw nothing except empty pavement disappearing beyond a line of pine trees. He shook his head with quiet amusement. "Looks like your company got lost." Marcus answered without moving. "No, they are exactly where they need to be." The words barely settled before a faint sound reached the checkpoint. It was not a siren. It was not the roar of speeding engines. It was simply the steady rhythm of several powerful vehicles traveling together with deliberate precision. Most people ignored it at first. Then the retired truck driver slowly lowered his newspaper. The family waiting inside the sport utility vehicle turned toward the eastern highway. Even the gas station clerk stopped pretending to wipe the counter. Something was approaching, and whatever it was, it did not resemble ordinary traffic. Ryan narrowed his eyes as three identical black sport utility vehicles appeared over the distant rise. They maintained perfect spacing, moving at the posted speed limit with headlights illuminated despite the bright morning sun. There were no emergency lights, no dramatic entrance. Their quiet discipline somehow drew more attention than flashing sirens ever could. Derek folded his arms. Federal, he guessed. Ryan shrugged, probably passing through. Marcus remained silent. The convoy continued forward until it reached the growing line of waiting vehicles. Drivers instinctively pulled farther onto the shoulder, creating just enough room for the three vehicles to advance together. Nobody directed them. Nobody needed to. Their presence alone seemed to change the rhythm of the entire highway. The lead vehicle stopped several yards from the checkpoint. The two behind it halted with remarkable precision, leaving identical distances between each bumper. Their engines continued running, yet the scene somehow felt quieter than before. Ryan exchanged another uncertain glance with Derek. Neither officer approached immediately. One by one, the vehicle doors opened. Men and women stepped onto the pavement wearing simple civilian clothing beneath dark jackets. There were no dramatic gestures, no hurried movements, and no raised voices. Every motion appeared calm, practiced, and purposeful. One silver-haired man walked toward the checkpoint carrying nothing except a leather folder. His posture reflected years of discipline rather than authority on display. He stopped beside Marcus before looking toward Ryan with professional courtesy. "Good morning, officer," he said evenly. Ryan nodded. "Morning. Can I help you?" The man smiled politely. "That depends. We received notice that an unexpected delay occurred at this location." Ryan looked briefly toward Marcus before answering. "Routine traffic stop." The silver-haired visitor glanced at Marcus for only a moment. Their eyes met with the familiarity of people who required no introductions. Marcus gave the slightest nod. Nothing more. No handshake. No explanation. Yet that tiny exchange carried a quiet respect impossible to overlook. Derek shifted uneasily. "Who exactly are you?" The visitor reached calmly into his jacket and presented official identification. Ryan accepted it with confident hands, but as his eyes moved across the credentials, the confidence slowly faded from his expression. He read the identification once, then again, more carefully. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Derek noticed the change immediately. Ryan. Ryan did not answer. He simply looked from the identification back to Marcus, then once more at the name printed before him. For the first time since sunrise, the officer who had controlled every conversation found himself searching for words that refused to come. Around them, the waiting crowd sensed the shift without understanding its cause. The balance of the morning had changed. Nobody had raised a voice. Nobody had made a threat. Yet the quiet certainty Marcus had carried since arriving no longer seemed mysterious. It finally seemed completely justified. Ryan Cole stared at the identification card for several long seconds, reading every line as though he expected the words to rearrange themselves into something less unbelievable. They did not. The silver-haired official waited patiently, showing neither impatience nor satisfaction. He simply extended one hand. "Thank you, officer." Ryan returned the identification almost mechanically. I was not informed anyone from your office would be here today." The man accepted the credential with a courteous nod. "You were not expected to be." His answer was calm, but it carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to speaking only when necessary. Derek Mason stepped closer, his curiosity overcoming his earlier confidence. "Can someone explain what is going on?" The visitor turned slightly toward Marcus Brooks before speaking. "Commander Brooks, thank you for your patience." The title settled over the checkpoint with remarkable force. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody gasped dramatically. Yet the effect was immediate. Ryan looked at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time. The worn jacket, the faded cap, the dusty pickup truck, and the quiet smile suddenly formed a completely different picture. Marcus answered with the same calm respect he had shown since sunrise. I appreciate your prompt arrival. The visitor nodded once. We received your update immediately. Behind him, the men and women who had arrived in the 3 black sport utility vehicles remained quietly in place. None of them appeared surprised. None asked unnecessary questions. Their discipline alone spoke volumes. Ryan cleared his throat. Commander? Marcus finally looked directly at him. Yes. Ryan searched for words that refused to come. Every assumption he had made that morning now seemed painfully incomplete. He had expected excuses. He had expected frustration. Instead, he had spent nearly half an hour questioning a man whose composure had never depended on revealing who he was. Derek looked toward the silver-haired official. Commander of what? The answer came without hesitation. Delta Force. Silence spread across the checkpoint like a sudden change in the weather. The waiting drivers exchanged confused glances. Most had never met anyone connected to such a unit. They only recognized the quiet respect reflected in the faces of those who had arrived with the convoy. Marcus did not react to the title. He neither corrected nor emphasized it. He simply stood exactly as he had from the beginning, hands relaxed, posture steady, expression unchanged. Ryan slowly removed the folder containing Marcus's driver's license, registration, and insurance card. He held them for a brief moment before extending them forward with both hands. Marcus accepted the documents with a polite nod. Thank you. There was no trace of triumph in his voice. No attempt to embarrass anyone. The absence of anger somehow made the moment even more difficult for the officers standing before him. The silver-haired official looked toward Ryan with professional courtesy. Officer, we would appreciate copies of any documentation related to today's stop, including available camera recordings and incident notes. Appropriate offices will handle the administrative review through established procedures. Ryan nodded automatically. Yes, sir. His voice sounded noticeably quieter now. Across the highway, the retired truck driver slowly removed his cap. The family inside the sport utility vehicle watched in complete silence. Even the school bus driver remained seated with both hands resting on the steering wheel, waiting patiently as the extraordinary scene unfolded without raised voices, without confrontation, and without a single dramatic gesture. Marcus glanced briefly toward the people who had quietly witnessed the entire morning. Some looked relieved. Others looked thoughtful. A few simply looked down, perhaps wondering how many ordinary travelers had stood in that very spot believing they had no choice. Marcus understood something many people never learned. Real authority did not need to announce itself. It did not depend on appearances, expensive vehicles, or impressive introductions. Sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who remained calm long enough for the truth to arrive on its own. For several moments, nobody moved. The highway remained quiet except for the low hum of idling engines and the distant rustle of pine branches swaying in the October breeze. It was remarkable how quickly certainty could disappear. Only minutes earlier, Ryan Cole and Derek Mason had controlled every conversation at the checkpoint. Now they listened more carefully than they spoke. The silver-haired official opened the leather folder he had carried from the lead vehicle and reviewed a single page before looking toward Ryan with the same measured professionalism he had shown from the beginning. Officer, this matter will be documented through the appropriate administrative channels. We will need copies of all available body camera recordings, vehicle camera footage, dispatch communications, and any written reports associated with this stop. Ryan nodded immediately. Yes, sir. There was no argument. No hesitation. Derek looked toward the patrol vehicle where the recording equipment remained active. For the first time that morning, he seemed to realize that every word spoken since Marcus arrived had likely been preserved exactly as it happened. Marcus quietly observed the exchange without interruption. He neither demanded consequences nor commented on the request. His attention drifted toward the line of waiting travelers. The elderly truck driver slowly tipped his hat in Marcus's direction before returning it to his head. The family with the bicycles smiled with visible relief. Even the gas station clerk seemed to stand a little straighter than before. It was not because anyone had witnessed a dramatic confrontation. It was because they had witnessed something much rarer. They had watched accountability arrive without anger. The silver-haired official turned another page inside the folder. Commander Brooks, headquarters has already coordinated with the appropriate federal and state offices. They have requested a complete review of checkpoint procedures conducted at this location. Marcus gave a quiet nod. That is the correct process. Ryan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before speaking. Commander Brooks, I would like to apologize for the way this morning unfolded. Marcus looked at him calmly. Officer, apologies matter most when they become actions. Ryan accepted the answer without complaint. It was neither harsh nor forgiving. It was simply honest. Derek stood silently beside him, no longer searching for explanations or excuses. Around them, the waiting crowd continued watching with respectful silence. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. The moment carried a different kind of weight. It reminded everyone present that trust in public service depended not upon authority alone, but upon fairness. Exercised every single day. The silver-haired official closed the folder and offered Ryan a professional handshake. Thank you for your cooperation moving forward. Ryan accepted it quietly. Nearby, one member of the arriving team spoke briefly with local dispatch through a secure radio while another documented the scene with routine photographs of the checkpoint, the patrol vehicles, and the surrounding roadway. Every step followed established procedure. Nothing appeared rushed. Nothing appeared personal. Marcus glanced once more at the familiar black Ford pickup that had carried him across thousands of miles without drawing attention. It looked exactly the same as it had at sunrise. The only thing that had changed was the understanding of those standing around it. The truck had never represented status. The worn jacket had never concealed weakness. The calm voice had never reflected uncertainty. They had simply reflected a man who understood that genuine confidence never depended upon announcing rank before character had the opportunity to reveal itself. As the first waiting vehicles finally began moving through the checkpoint, the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Conversations remained quiet, but the fear that had settled over the town for so long seemed just a little lighter than it had been only an hour before. The checkpoint slowly returned to life as vehicles rolled forward one by one. Yet nobody who had witnessed that morning would ever see the stretch of highway the same way again. The conversations inside those passing cars were quiet, thoughtful, and remarkably similar. People were no longer talking about uniforms or authority. They were talking about character. Marcus Brooks walked back to his aging black Ford pickup with the same steady pace he had shown since the moment he first stopped. He opened the driver's door, placed his documents neatly inside the center console, and adjusted the faded baseball cap that had never revealed anything about the responsibilities he carried. To anyone passing by, he still looked like an ordinary traveler preparing to continue a long drive across America. That was exactly how he preferred it. The silver-haired official approached one final time. Commander, the route ahead has been cleared. Headquarters wishes you a safe journey. Marcus smiled warmly. Thank you. Please thank everyone for responding with professionalism. The official nodded respectfully before returning to the lead sport utility vehicle. Ryan Cole remained standing near the patrol vehicle, watching quietly as Marcus prepared to leave. There was no hostility left in his expression, only reflection. After a long moment, he stepped forward. Commander Brooks. Marcus looked up. Ryan took a slow breath before speaking. I cannot change how this morning began, but I can decide how every morning after this one begins. Marcus studied him for a second before offering a small nod. That decision belongs to you. It always has. There was no lecture, no public humiliation, no demand for recognition. The lesson carried greater weight precisely because it had been delivered with dignity instead of anger. Derek Mason also stepped forward. Safe travels, sir. Marcus answered with the same courtesy he had shown everyone throughout the morning. Thank you, officer. Take care of your community. Those simple words seemed to surprise Derek more than any revelation had. They reminded him that respect often arrived first from the person who had every reason to withhold it. As Marcus started the truck, the familiar engine came to life with a low, steady rumble. He pulled onto the open highway at the posted speed limit, disappearing toward the horizon exactly as he had intended when the day began. The three black sport utility vehicles followed at a respectful distance, their disciplined formation soon fading into the rolling hills beyond Ashcroft. Behind them, the checkpoint remained standing, but something invisible had changed. The travelers who continued through it no longer lowered their eyes quite so quickly. The gas station clerk returned inside with a lighter step. The retired truck driver folded his newspaper and smiled to himself before climbing back into his cab. Even the October breeze seemed to carry away a silence that had lingered over the town for far too long. Sometimes people believe that power is measured by titles, uniforms, or the authority to stop someone on the side of the road. Yet the strongest form of power has never been the ability to command another person. It has always been the discipline to treat every stranger with fairness before learning who they are. Because every badge represents a promise, every uniform carries public trust, and every ordinary traveler deserves the same respect, whether they lead a nation, serve in silence, or simply drive an old pickup truck toward the next sunrise. In the end, the road remembered only one truth. Character always arrives before reputation, and genuine justice never needs to announce itself because it is recognized the moment people choose to do what is right.